after a quick hit on the tennis court, and sometimes it involved both. He also had a ready eye for strategy and communicating Cairns Group position publicly. It was Nestor who first suggested that the Australian Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, use an already scheduled address to the GATT Council to introduce the Cairns Group's first proposal in October 1987. Nestor is remembered as an important player within the Cairns Group because he had a knack for finding positions that bridged the very diverse positions within the Cairns Group. There was also, they remember, a very solid streak of Latin steel in Nestor, and as Fernando has recalled, he was one of the prime movers of the group of Latin American countries who withdrew from the negotiations at the midterm review in Montreal in December 1988, and then it was repeated later on as well. And I think this importantly demonstrated for the first time that without an acceptable liberalising outcome, there would be no outcome at all for the outcome. Don Kenyon recalls the frequent warnings given by Nestor that we would regret quarantining green categories of support as they would get out of control in the future as the new form of agricultural distortion. At the time, Don says that they knew Nestor had a point, but nobody else inside the Cairns Group foresaw green forms of domestic support becoming as important as they subsequently had today. From 1988 until 2005, Nestor served as Argentina's ambassador to Australia. He did that with great distinction, having attended meetings over a decade with 7 Australian trade ministers and 2 prime ministers drawn from both sides of Australian politics. Nestor enjoyed access to decision makers in Australia that was second to none. His term was marked by continued cooperation on economic matters, enhanced education and cultural exchanges, and he also served with distinction as Dean of the Diplomatic Corps in Canberra from 2004 to 2005. While in Australia, Nestor lectured at the Australian National University, and he helped to establish the Centre for Latin American Studies at our National University in Canberra. He was honoured in 2004 with an honorary doctorate of laws by the ANU. On his return to Buenos Aires, Nestor fulfilled a long-held objective by hosting a major seminar sponsored by the University of Buenos Aires and the Australian National University. The outcome was a book released in 2011, edited by Nestor, entitled Under the Southern Cross, Australia, Argentina, a comparative analysis of their economic, social, cultural and educational development. That book stands as a testament to the friendship and links Nestor established with so many Australians and between our 2 countries. Finally, just let me say that as I grew up through the negotiating function in our Department of Trade and our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we always were told stories about Nestor. I never worked directly with him, but it was a name and a reputation that came before him. Whenever I was in Geneva, he was off in Australia and vice versa. But certainly he's a man that's admired and remembered and respected greatly for his contribution to the Cairns Group and to efforts by those who worked assiduously in the former GATT and now the WTO to try and make the unfairness of agricultural markets better for all of us in the end of the day, despite the political difficulties. So I'd like to propose a toast, a metaphorical toast at this stage. Hopefully, that's less metaphorical in a little while. But to Nestor, thank you very much for all your contributions.
Right, we are going to come close outside. We will have some Argentine wines to share with all. So Alejandro, I would like to listen to you.
I look forward to the toast, even though it's not Chilean. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you for inviting me to participate here. Nestor Stancanelli was certainly a very good friend, an outstanding trade negotiator. As Hamish recalled the formation of the Cairns Group, I'm old enough to say that I was there too in Pattaya and the Cairns, etc. So I lived through those years, and I saw that Nestor Stancanelli was a person who can make a real difference. I'll say that until the Tokyo round, agriculture had been mainly the affair of the 2 big elephants, European communities, as it was known at the time, and the United States. They called the shots, and they tried to get a balance, doing as little as possible, and at the same time while having a situation where there was no basic understanding or consensus about the rules that the rules to regulate international agricultural trade. So there was a breakdown in the system, and something had to be done. And this was clearly understood by some who led the way, beginning with the Cairns Group, beginning with Montevideo and Pattaya and Cairns and so on. And one thing which became very clear to us then was that in order to be effective in the negotiations, you had to have a technical basis. You had to master the details, the intricacies of agriculture policies. And that is not something easy. And you have to have the analytical capacity to analyze to assess the impact of proposals and ideas. And I think that Australia understood this, and it's little wonder that Australia became the leader of the Cairns Group and to hold the chair of the Cairns Group on a permanent basis. So they had the technical capacity to do it. But it was not only Australia, it was Nestor. And Nestor was equivalent to a whole team of Australians. He knew everything. He had to know everything. He had to know more than others and all the rest, and he knew all the details. So he was a formidable person to negotiate, particularly when he is on your side. That led to the Uruguay round, an agreement over an understanding about the basic rules that must regulate agricultural trade, bringing agriculture back into the fold of the multilateral trade system. Not much trade liberalization. Some reform, change of instruments. For example, the European communities changing the use of variable levies, etc. And then some reform ensued afterwards. In some countries, driven by budgetary considerations, and in others by the demographics. But it has to be recalled today that, as I said, not much liberalization took place then. And that this is a must. And that the countries, the same countries, sent out a very clear message. And they wrote it in the Uruguay round, that the next time around, it has to be for real. You have to reform agriculture policies. And they wrote it. The preamble of the agreement on agriculture, recalling that their long-term objective, as agreed in the midterm review of the Uruguay round, to establish a fair and market-oriented agricultural system. And that reform process should be initiated through negotiations, commitment, and support and protection, and through the establishment of strengthened and more operational effective GATT rules and disciplines. This is later reproduced in Article 20 of the Agricultural Agreement. That was then. Long-term objective. It was written in 1988. And that objective has not changed because we have not moved much, at least in the context of the WTO. We're still waiting. Since doing agricultural reform cannot be a standalone agreement negotiated in isolation because of the politics, it requires it requires a balance. In other words, how much of other issues in other areas is needed to do agricultural reform, however modest. And that requires a lot of NAMA. And this requires a lot of hard work to achieve that balanced exchange rate between agriculture, NAMA, and agriculture, NAMA plus other issues. And we came quite close to achieving that. 2008, we got a deal on agriculture. Complicated. You people really understand it. I don't. And it's a document is still there, Ref 4, I think it is. It's stable to an extent. It's flexible, and it's transparent. It's transparent because a lot of effort went into making as parent, making it known how countries would use the exceptions built in the agricultural text, and therefore knowing what the impact could be. And that was achieved in agriculture, but not enough. So that became a problem. Except for one, maybe, which also came quite close to solving, but never quite, on the special safeguard mechanism, where some countries, I'm exaggerating, not want a special safeguard mechanism not linked to actual liberalization and with no limitations. A blank check to wipe out any foreign supplier without much analysis, justification, or warning. That doesn't seem right to me. It didn't seem right to me then, nor now. It does, it became a political issue, and no doubt the traditional safeguard we have, Article 19 in the Agreement Safeguard, is not sufficient for agriculture because it's triggered by volumes and not by prices. So maybe something can be done, but under certain disciplines and conditions. It cannot be a blank check. It doesn't work. What was traditionally agriculture, so on, a developing issue, now became an issue of exporters and importers. Since the safeguard mechanism was not liked and opposed also by many exporting developing countries. But even then, in 2008, we got stuck on NAMA, the most classical and traditional of all areas under the multilateral trading system. The old notion of less than full reciprocity, especially differential treatment, whereby these notions is a one-size-fits-all for developing countries, did not work anymore, and does not work anymore. Because we have a different balance. We have countries, we have China and other emerging economies that must do more. And so we have a problem now of achieving the other balance on NAMA and elsewhere. We have to reinvent, if you will, those concepts and introduce more flexibility and change the politics. Now, little wonder that in all these years, the bilateral free trade agreements for MEGA have become so easy to do because they don't deal with domestic support. They don't require that exchange or that balance to be achieved. And Nestor, in his last years, came to Geneva very often. And what we were discussing today, as Roberto, the Director General, recalled, about doable, recalibration, meaning less efficient, more flexibility, that was what Nestor was saying in those years when he came to Geneva to deliver a message representing Argentinian interest. I, and many others, dismissed his ideas, his approach, because we thought that it was Argentina who wanted to do as little as possible, at least on NAMA, to as little as possible to bring more competition in its domestic market. However, today, as I read the news, the press, and I talk to friends and colleagues, and I see average. And this was what Nestor was proposing in those years, leading up to 2008. Come to my office and say, we should do the approach of the Uruguay route. We should average. That would introduce flexibility. We can get things done and move on. And as I was today, I have frequently thought when reading the news that Nestor would open the door of my office and say, I told you so. With this, it was lamentable that to do something, to bring this round to a close, that they missed the boat on serious agricultural reform. It's a bad combination of some who have advocated leadership, like the United States, to carry out the domestic discussion and political battle to move that United States trade policy in a serious way to do agricultural reform and to bring it to the WTO. It is lamentable that others too, like India and a few other countries, want to do little or nothing on agriculture and maybe other areas. And that combination, I think, has led us to a situation where we have now, in a situation where we are bringing down the ambition and missing the boat of doing serious agricultural reform once and for all. I understand the sensitivities, I understand the politics, but I do believe, very sincerely, that agriculture policies cannot be continued to carry out at the expense of others, at the expense of the poorest farmers of the world. So I think that Nestor understood this very well, and as has been said, he understood it with passion, with intellect, and skills. So I pay, like others, a tribute to his memory.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Thank you. I'd like Evan, if you could continue.
Thanks, Alberto, and thanks also for inviting me along to take part in this tribute to Nestor, which I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to do. I see I'm down to speak on history and perspectives, which I have no intention of doing because I'll put you all to sleep. It's a bit close to lunch. Instead of which, since this is a gathering in memory of Nestor, a tribute to him, I'd like to instead suggest a few relevant points looking at through the lens of his career and his contribution to our trade and WTO community. Firstly, the man. I'm one of those who knew Nestor from the beginning of the Uruguay round. I joined the agricultural division of the GATT in June 1986, just before Punta. So I had a close-up view from a pretty humble level throughout the round. And Nestor, though I discovered he was only 7 years older than me, was someone that we very much looked up to and was